In October 1917, the Bolsheviks established their regime on the basis of the Communist Party and a Soviet government which consisted of the Council of People's Commissars, later called the Council of Ministers, and the Soviets, or more precisely, a Soviet Executive Committee. In the Bolshevik Russian Communist Party, 5.2% of the members were Jewish, according to the 1922 census, and this was about the same as the percentage of Jews in the Tsarist army in the early 20th century, by the way. However, while the total number of Bolshevik Jews was rather tiny, they tended to reach high-ranking positions. In the Fifth Party Congress, 10 years before the revolution, back when the Bolsheviks were tethered to the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, about 10% of the Bolshevik attendees were Jewish, and after the revolution, in March 1919, 17% of the party congress attendees were Jewish, and the next party congress was 14.5% Jewish. The Central Committee, which was the elite that the Congress would elect to rule over the party in the intervals between Congresses, was about 30% Jewish in 1917 and 1918. By 1921, the Central Committee was 20% Jewish, and by 1939, 10% Jewish. The Political Bureau of the Central Committee, aka the Politburo, which was in the March 1919 Party Congress solidified as the prime authority in policy-making on the party level, was composed of only 5 main members, first of whom was Vladimir Lenin, the undisputed leader of the Bolshevik Party. Lenin was predominantly of ethnic Russian background, but had some German, Jewish, Kalmyk and Swedish ancestry as well. It was Lenin's maternal great-grandparents who were Jews, but one of them was not at all friendly towards Judaism and made sure that their sons converted to Christianity early on. As a Christian, Lenin's grandfather, who had changed his name to Alexander, had no ties to any Jewish traditions, and he married a Christian of German-Swedish background. Lenin was most likely in his late 20s when he learned that he had a Jewish grandparent, but he never considered himself a Jewish person and instead identified himself as Russian. Of the 5 main Politburo members, 3 were Jews: Leon Trotsky, Lev Kamenev, who was actually half Jewish, and Nikolai Krestinsky, who probably was of Jewish background as well. And of the 3 non-voting members, 1 was Jewish: Grigory Zinoviev. In 1922, there were 3 Jews among the 7 main, or 10 total members of the Politburo, and in 1924, Jews still comprised about a third of the Politburo, but with the defeat of Trotsky, Zinoviev and Kamenev, the Politburo gained an ethnic Russian majority in 1927, and an ethnic Russian majority was retained in the Politburo for the rest of the Soviet Union's existence. By 1930, when the worst Soviet mass murders were about to begin, the Politburo had 9 main members, of whom one was Jewish. The second most influential and authoritative body in the Soviet Union was the Council of People's Commissars, aka Sovnarkom, which was a cabinet-style government comprised, as the name suggests, of People's Commissars who were each in charge of one of the various government departments or commissariats like agriculture, trade, education or finance. In 1918 to 1920, there were 21 commissariats and therefore 21 people's commissars, and of them 3 were Jews. If we count all the people who were working in the Council of People's Commissars, and not just the commissariat chiefs, we find out that around 20% were Jews. By 1936, the percentage of Jewish people's commissars had risen from that 14% to 30% and would then drop due to the Great Terror. Since the Soviet Union had been created in 1922, we are, of course, now talking about the All-Union Council of People's Commissars. The chairmanship of the Council of People's Commissars corresponded approximately to Prime Minister, and the position of chairman at first belonged to Lenin, who was predominantly an ethnic Russian as we saw earlier, and his deputy, the ethnic Russian Alexei Rykov, became the chairman after Lenin's funeral. In 1930, Rykov was ousted from the chairmanship and replaced by another ethnic Russian, only this time one that happened to be a top henchman of the new Soviet dictator. Last and least of the organs of power in the Bolshevik regime were the Soviets or workers' councils. Numerous Soviets existed all across Russia after the revolution, and much like the party, Soviet delegates met in a periodical Congress of Soviets where they elected a group of elites called the Central Executive Committee. On paper, this was the highest state body, but in reality it was the weakest part of the state. For the first year and a half or so of Bolshevik rule, back when the Central Executive Committee possessed definitive legislative powers, its chairman was Yakov Sverdlov, who was Jewish and a Central Committee member as well. But in March 1990, Sverdlov died of influenza or typhus, and the position at the head of the Central Executive Committee was granted to the ethnic Russian Mikhail Kalinin, who would occupy it for more than 20 years. In late 1917, of the total number of Bolsheviks in the Central Executive Committee, about 37% were Jews, a figure that doesn't count in all members in this body, since the Bolsheviks had not just yet acquired full hegemony, but is undoubtedly indicative of the prevailing trend. And by the late 1920s, when we are talking about the All-Union Central Executive Committee, the percentage of Jews had declined to 10%. Thus, the Jewish representation in the Central Executive Committee met pretty much the same fate as it did in the Bolshevik Party, meaning it was initially quite significant and then rapidly declined from 1920 onwards. In the Council of People's Commissars, we saw a different trend. one that started out with small percentages but then grew and peaked in the mid-1930s, shortly before the Great Terror. This was also true of the Soviet political police, which was created in December 1917 as the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage. The political police would be rechristened multiple times before the collapse of the Soviet Union, but during the first 5 years of Bolshevik rule, it was known simply as the Extraordinary Commission, or Cheka, as its Russian acronym was pronounced, and it was headed by the ethnically Polish Felix Dzerzhinsky. Like in the party, many visible positions in the Cheka were held by Jews. For example, in the most significant one of the Cheka departments, half of the 12 interrogators were Jews, but in overall, a comparatively tiny role in the Cheka leadership was played by Jews. In the Cheka central apparatus, meaning those in the Lubyanka main office in Moscow, only 3.7% were Jews, and of all the senior positions, 8.6% were in Jewish hands. By 1936, the year when the Great Terror began, the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs, NKVD, had fully absorbed the functions of the political police, and this was the year when the Jewish portion of the Soviet political police reached its peak, with 39% of the senior officers being Jews. But by the time the Great Terror ended in 1939, that figure had been reduced to about 4%. These are all quite astonishing overrepresentations, since Jews were just below 2% of the Soviet population, but not as astonishing as the case of the ethnic Latvians, who constituted 0.1% of the Russian population and yet managed to occupy over 52% of the Cheka senior positions in 1918. This Latvian overrepresentation in the Cheka leadership vastly exceeded any overrepresentation that the Jews ever achieved in the political police leadership. The explanation is largely rooted in the fact that many in Latvia found common ground with Bolshevism in desiring Latvian independence from Tsarist Russia and an end to the Great War. Lenin, who didn't trust Russians to be able to shed blood in the required way, had developed close ties to Latvian communist movements, and thus Latvians were recruited to form the bulk of the Cheka, as well as Red Army leadership at the beginning of the Bolshevik rule. This, of course, doesn't excuse anyone's actions, but it shows how even a seemingly unbelievable overrepresentation, like that of the Latvians, can be explained without having to resort to conspiracy theories or race realism. So why would anyone then feel the need to do that in the case of the Jews, when we already know about the Jewish literacy, Tsarist persecution and all the other stuff?